The hospital called at 6:42 a.m., the kind of time that already tells you something is wrong. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, shoes on, hair still damp from the shower, my overnight bag zipped and leaning against the wall like a silent promise. I had packed it the night before. 2 changes of clothes, my charger, a paperback I probably wouldn't read, and a folder with every document I'd been told to bring. Insurance cards, ID, consent forms, proof that I had done everything right. I answered on the second ring. "Hi, this is transplant coordination," the woman said gently, the way people speak when they've already rehearsed bad news. "I'm calling about your surgery, scheduled for today." I didn't say anything. I just waited. There was a pause. Then the words landed one by one, slow and deliberate. "We're going to have to postpone. There's been an issue with your insurance coverage." Postpone. My fingers tightened around the phone, not in panic but in control. I had learned a long time ago that reacting too fast gave other people power over you. "I don't understand," I said evenly. "It was authorized. We cleared this weeks ago." "Yes," she replied, and I could hear the apology threaded into her voice. "But overnight the policy status changed. It's showing as canceled." Canceled. I looked at my bag, at the door, at the quiet apartment that had been carefully prepared for my absence. I had waited 8 months for the surgery. 8 months of dialysis, of planning my life in 4-hour blocks, of pretending I wasn't afraid while my body slowly betrayed me. Cancelled by who? I asked. Another pause, a longer one this time. It shows the termination was requested by the primary policy holder. I didn't ask who that was. I already knew. When I hung up, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat back down on the bed and placed the phone beside me, like it might explode if I handled it too roughly. My breathing stayed slow and measured. Stress makes everything worse when your kidneys are failing. That wasn't panic. That was muscle memory. The worst part wasn't the delay. It wasn't even the fear of what waiting longer could do to my body. The worst part was that this wasn't a surprise. Before I tell you what happened next, you need to understand how we got here. Because this didn't start with a canceled insurance policy. It started years earlier in a house that looked perfectly normal from the outside. I grew up in North Carolina in a quiet subdivision where all the lawns were cut to the same length and no one ever parked on the street. My childhood home had beige siding, white shutters, and a front porch that never got used. From the curb, it looked like stability. Inside, everything revolved around my father's approval. My father, Thomas Walker, believed control was the same thing as love. He liked to say he was traditional, which was just a polite way of saying his word was final. He didn't yell often. He didn't have to. Disappointment delivered quietly was his favorite tool. My mother learned early that peace required compliance. She was soft-spoken, always smoothing edges, always explaining away my father's behavior as stress or concern. "He just wants what's best," she'd say, even when what was best always seemed to come with conditions. Then there was my younger brother, Caleb, the golden child, 2 years younger, louder, charming in a way that made teachers forgive missed assignments and neighbors forgive broken rules. When Caleb failed a class, the system was unfair. When I brought home perfect grades, my father asked why I'd missed the extra credit. I learned to be useful, responsible, quiet. There's a moment burned into my memory, the kind that seems small until you realize it shaped everything. I was 16 and had worked all summer at a local grocery store. I saved every paycheck and bought myself a used laptop for school. I brought it home, set it carefully on the kitchen table, proud in a way I didn't show often. My father glanced at it and asked, "Where'd you get the money?" "I worked for it," I said. He nodded once, then turned to Caleb and handed him his credit card. "Go pick something out too," he said. "Don't want things to feel uneven." That was the lesson. My effort wasn't something to celebrate. It was something to balance out, so no one else felt uncomfortable. There was only one person who ever noticed it for what it was. My Aunt Margaret, my mother's older sister. She wasn't loud or confrontational. She just watched. And sometimes later, she'd say quietly, "That didn't sit right with me." When I moved out at 21 into a small apartment near Raleigh, it felt like freedom. It was also when my health began to unravel. I'd always been tired, always cold, always swollen after long shifts. I ignored it, pushed through it. Responsibility was the one thing I knew how to do. Until one morning, I stood up too fast and the room went dark. The diagnosis came in calm sentences that didn't feel calm at all. Chronic kidney disease. Advanced. Manageable but serious. My life became appointments, lab results, and waiting rooms that smelled faintly of disinfectant and fear. When my father found out, he didn't ask how I felt. He asked what I had done wrong. That was when I first realized that needing help in my family was just another way to lose power. And I had no idea yet how much power he was about to take. At first, I didn't tell anyone how bad it was. In my family, illness wasn't met with comfort. It was met with questions, accusations dressed up as concern. I learned quickly that every detail I shared would be analyzed for fault, so I kept things surface level. "I'm tired." "It's manageable." "The doctors are monitoring it." They weren't monitoring it. They were managing decline. Dialysis entered my life quietly, then all at once. 3 times a week, hours at a time. My schedule stopped being mine. My body felt like it belonged to a system that tolerated me, not one that cared. I still worked full-time, still smiled to customers, still pretended I wasn't counting minutes between bathroom breaks and blood pressure checks. I was good at pretending. That's when my father made his offer. He called it help. He always did. He invited me over for dinner, sat across from me at the table like this was a business discussion, and explained that keeping me on his employer-sponsored insurance plan would make things simpler. He'd been at the same company for decades. The coverage was solid. Specialists, transplants, things my own entry-level plan couldn't touch. "I'll keep you on," he said, like he was offering me a seat on a lifeboat. "You'll reimburse me for the extra premium. That's only fair." I hesitated, not because I didn't understand the value, but because I understood him. "I'd like to see the paperwork," I said carefully. His expression changed instantly. Not anger, something colder, wounded pride. "So you don't trust me," he said. That sentence had ended more arguments in my childhood than I could count. I swallowed the familiar guilt and nodded. "I trust you." That was enough. The first payment was $310 a month. I set it up immediately, labeled insurance in the memo line, and told myself this was temporary. A bridge. Something I could step off once my health stabilized. It didn't stay $310 for long. 2 months later, he told me premiums had increased. Then there was a benefits adjustment. Then a plan restructuring. Each explanation came without documents. Each question I asked was treated like a personal insult. "You don't understand how insurance works," he'd say. "Just send the money." So I did. I automated the transfer. Same date, same amount, until it wasn't. The number crept upward slowly, quietly, the way boundaries erode when no one is watching. $360, $395, $430. Every time I noticed, he had a reason ready. I was tired. I was sick. I needed the coverage. So I paid. Around that time, my brother's life began to unravel in familiar ways. Caleb couldn't keep a job. He had ideas, not plans. Emergencies appeared constantly, each one more urgent than the last. Rent, a car repair, a credit card he'd forgotten to pay. My parents never asked me directly at first. They never had to. The expectation hovered in the room until my father finally said it out loud. "You can help," he'd say. "You're responsible. You have savings." Those savings were supposed to be for medical expenses. For the future, I wasn't sure I'd have. But every time I said no, the silence afterward felt heavy and punishing. Once, I gave him $1,500 to cover Caleb's missed rent. Another time, I paid nearly $1,000 when my parents' refrigerator died. Each time, I told myself it was temporary. Each time, the requests came back faster. My Aunt Margaret noticed. She didn't confront anyone. She never created scenes. She just started asking me quiet questions. Are you okay with this? Did you see the paperwork? Do you feel like you can say no? I didn't answer honestly. I wasn't ready to. I met Daniel during this phase of my life. He worked in operations for a shipping company, the kind of job that rewards patience and attention to detail. He was calm in a way that didn't feel performative. He noticed things, how I stiffened when my phone rang, how I apologized for needing to sit down. One night, after a dialysis session that left me shaking, he asked, "Why does your father handle your insurance?" I shrugged. "It's easier." He nodded, but his eyes didn't. "Easier for who?" I didn't have an answer. 8 months into waiting for a transplant, the call finally came. Not a guarantee, but movement. A potential match. Tests. Timelines. Hope that felt dangerous to hold. The hospital scheduled the surgery. I arranged time off work. I cleaned my apartment, like order might protect me. I stopped answering family calls that weren't urgent. For the first time in years, I chose myself without explanation. 2 days before the surgery, my father called. Caleb had gotten himself into trouble again. A lease he couldn't afford. A roommate leaving. He needed a co-signer or he'd be evicted. "You'll do it," my father said, already certain. "I can't," I replied. The word felt strange in my mouth. Solid. Final. There was a long pause on the line. "So," he said slowly, "you're choosing yourself over family." "Yes," I said. I didn't soften it. Another pause. Then, quietly, "Fine. Learn what that feels like." He hung up. I went to bed, expecting guilt messages. Maybe my mother's familiar plea to keep the peace. Instead, the next morning, the hospital called and told me my insurance had been canceled. I gripped the edge of my couch so tightly that the fabric dug into my palms. My overnight bag, still leaning by the door, felt like a cruel reminder of everything I had planned, everything I had waited for, everything I was about to lose. Canceled. I repeated slowly, my voice calm because calm was all I had left. "Yes," said the coordinator, her tone practiced and soft. It was canceled by the primary policy holder, effective immediately. I knew exactly who that meant. My father, the man who had spent my entire life quietly controlling me, measuring my worth by my obedience, not by who I was. He had access to my insurance for months under the guise of help, and now he had used it like a weapon. I didn't panic. I couldn't. I breathed slowly and methodically, counting each inhale and exhale. Panic would only give him the satisfaction of knowing he had hurt me. Instead, I set the phone down and opened my laptop. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I had survived too many crises to waste time crying. This was an emergency and I needed a plan. I called my lawyer immediately. Priya answered on the second ring, and her calm voice cut through the chaos in my mind. I told her what had happened, every word measured. My father canceled my insurance. The hospital just postponed my kidney transplant. She didn't ask me to explain, didn't sigh or exclaim. She only said, "Do you have the cancellation notice?" "Not yet." "You will. Don't contact him. Don't warn him. Just wait for the email." Minutes later, the message arrived. Policy terminated. Effective immediately. I forwarded it to Priya, then sat back, letting my chest rise and fall slowly. Every fiber of my body wanted to react, but I had learned that measured responses worked better than fury. Within moments, Priya began working the phones. She escalated the issue with the insurance company, contacted the hospital's legal liaison, and started documenting every step. I stayed on the line with the transplant coordinator, holding on to hope like it was a life preserver. Then Aunt Margaret arrived. She didn't knock, she had a spare key, and stepped into the apartment like she had done thousands of times, but this time with purpose. She looked at me, her face calm but serious. "He finally did it," she said. I nodded. While Priya worked the legal angles, Margaret began going through old records. Text messages, payment confirmations, screenshots of insurance transfers. She moved with quiet precision, the kind of deliberate attention that only someone who has always been the silent observer can have. It was then that Priya dropped the bombshell. "Judith," she said slowly, "the cancellation didn't just come from your father. The login credentials were used from your account. Your father didn't hack it. He accessed it using the setup you allowed him months ago." I closed my eyes. My stomach twisted. 8 months of waiting, careful planning, careful living. And he had weaponized the very system I had trusted him to manage. "Let me show you," Priya continued. She traced the timestamps, the IP addresses, the phone numbers associated with the account. Every piece of evidence pointed to him. The login came from the home network where my father lived. The confirmation of the password reset was sent to a phone number I hadn't used in years, his phone. It wasn't just insurance fraud. It was identity misuse. It was medical interference. It was calculated. I felt a cold clarity settle in. He hadn't acted in a moment of anger or panic. This was deliberate, and it was dangerous. Every second the surgery was delayed, my body risked further damage. Every second he controlled the insurance, he controlled my life. Margaret placed a steadying hand on my arm. "We've got this," she said quietly. And in that moment, I believed her. Priya filed an emergency request to reinstate the policy while contacting the hospital to explain the situation. My transplant could not be released until we had the authorization back in place. Every second felt like an eternity, but we moved fast, deliberately, efficiently. I watched Margaret sort through the documents with the precision of someone preparing for battle. Every piece of evidence a weapon in the fight to reclaim my life. There were screenshots of payments I had made, messages confirming my father's instructions, a paper trail of 8 months of careful living and responsibility. It was clear he had used the system I trusted to jeopardize my survival. By late afternoon, Priya had temporarily reinstated my policy. Not perfect, not permanent, but enough for the transplant to proceed. I sat on the edge of the couch again, letting the weight of relief and lingering fear wash over me. I had survived the immediate crisis, but the knowledge of how calculated his betrayal had been left a mark that would take longer to heal. That night, as I packed my bag once more and checked my documents, I realized that calm was not just survival. Calm was my weapon. And for the first time in years, I understood that reclaiming control of my life was not just about managing illness. It was about dismantling the structures my father had used to dominate me. The next day, I would have surgery. The day after, I would begin to take back my life. But the story was far from over. There were still lessons to be learned, boundaries to enforce, and a reckoning waiting for the man who thought he could manipulate a system, and me without consequence. The next morning, sunlight spilled across my apartment in long, uneven stripes. I didn't unpack my bag. I didn't bother with coffee. I just sat, running through the steps in my head one more time. Hospital forms, insurance confirmations, ID, consent forms. Everything was accounted for, double-checked, triple-checked. Daniel called while I was reviewing the paperwork. "Are you nervous?" he asked, quietly, his voice a soft anchor in the storm. "I'm prepared," I said. "That's all that matters." He didn't argue. He just said, "I'll be there when you wake up." By the time we left for the hospital, I felt a strange mix of calm and urgency. 8 months of waiting had led to this day, and yet the knowledge of what had happened with my insurance lingered, a dark shadow stretching into every step I took. The hospital was calm, sterile, the kind of quiet that feels too controlled to be comfortable. The transplant coordinator met me at the entrance, her eyes sympathetic but professional. "We're ready," she said, leading me to the pre-op area. Everything seemed normal. Everything seemed safe, until my phone buzzed. It was a text from my father, just one line. "You think you can take what's mine and still be safe?" I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Every word he sent reminded me why this had escalated beyond family squabbles. This was control. This was power. And it ended today. I stepped into the surgical gown, feeling the sterile fabric against my skin. Daniel held my hand through the pre-op process, never speaking, never overreacting. His presence was steady, grounding, a reminder that some people in the world operated from care, not manipulation. Priya was on the phone, her calm voice walking me through the last-minute insurance verification. Every second counted. Every document had to be perfect. My father had shown me how far he could reach. Now I was watching experts undo his reach in real time. Then came the moment the coordinator looked at me and said, "Judith, one more thing before we wheel you in. Your father has tried contacting the hospital repeatedly today. He asked if we could release the organ anyway. We had to explain the situation to him. He's been insistent." I nodded. My face didn't show the shock, the anger, or the fear. I had learned to control those outwardly. Inside, my mind was a machine calculating precise. I knew what this meant. He was trying to manipulate, even now, even as my life literally depended on the decisions of professionals. I let the nurse wheel me toward the operating room. Each step was measured. Each inhale was a small act of defiance. I had allowed myself to be controlled for too long. That ended here. While the surgical team prepared, Priya spoke to the hospital's legal liaison one last time, making sure every log, every timestamp, every cancellation was properly documented. Margaret stood by my side, silent but unwavering, a reminder that not all witnesses are passive, that not all family is lost. The anesthesiologist asked me the routine questions: name, date of birth, allergies. I answered calmly, clearly. Each word was an assertion. I exist. I matter. I will not be erased. Then came the final moment before sedation. Daniel leaned over and whispered, "You're stronger than anyone thinks." I closed my eyes, not in fear, not in surrender, but in quiet determination. I had survived the betrayal, the manipulation, the months of uncertainty. I would survive the surgery. And when I woke, nothing would be the same. The operation lasted hours. Outside, the world continued, unaware of the battle being fought in the operating room. When I awoke, groggy, the first thing I saw was Daniel's calm, smiling face. Relief surged through me, but it was mingled with the knowledge of what had been at stake and who had nearly taken it from me. Later, once I was stabilized, Priya and Margaret came to my bedside. Every document had been filed, every timestamp logged. The cancellation, the fraudulent access, the interference, it was all there, undeniable, visible, undeniable proof of what had happened. I could finally allow myself a small smile. For the first time, I felt untangled from the web of control my father had built around me. The surgery was only the first step, but it symbolized so much more. Survival wasn't just about the organ. Survival was about reclaiming my life, my autonomy, my voice. And there was still the conversation waiting at home, the reckoning, the confrontation that would finally turn the tables and expose the full scope of what had been done. I didn't fear it. I only prepared, calm, measured, and ready. I had waited 8 months for a kidney and for my entire life to matter on my own terms. Now, I had both the time and the strength to make it count. A week after my surgery, I returned home. My apartment smelled faintly of antiseptic and fresh herbs. I had started a small balcony garden during recovery, something that belonged entirely to me. For the first time in months, I felt steady on my own 2 feet. But there was still one step left, one battle that demanded attention: my father. I waited for the moment to be precise. It wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity, documentation, and boundaries. I had Priya's support, Margaret's presence, and every piece of evidence lined up like soldiers ready for inspection. He called first, long and furious, his voice a mix of anger, disbelief, and guilt all tangled together. "You think you can say no and still get everything you want," he barked. "You're turning family into enemies." I stayed calm. Calm was my armor. I didn't yell. I didn't plead. I let the words pass over me, like wind over a stone. I replied evenly, "I'm not trying to get anything. You canceled my insurance 2 days before my surgery." There was silence, a long pause. "I what?" His voice faltered, cracking slightly. "I have every log, every timestamp, every screenshot of the payments I made. Priya is copied on all of it. Your access, your password resets, the cancellation, they're all documented." I could hear the shift in his breathing. He had assumed control, power, leverage, but now the evidence stripped it all away. "You're lying," he said, defensive again. "It's a family matter. Private." "Not when it jeopardizes my life," I said. My voice didn't waver. "This isn't about money or control anymore. This is about survival, and the records prove it." Margaret watched quietly from the doorway. I noticed the small nod she gave me, almost imperceptible, but it carried decades of knowing that calm, precision, and documentation were stronger than fury. Later that day, I forwarded everything to the district attorney's office. Unauthorized access, identity misuse, insurance fraud, and interference with medical care. They called it serious and high priority. They couldn't ignore it. He called again that night. This time quieter, slower. His words were tentative, but his tone still tried to mask responsibility. "You think I just wanted to help," he said. "You helped yourself to control my life," I replied. "Help isn't threats. Help isn't manipulation. And it certainly isn't jeopardizing someone's medical care." For the first time, I didn't feel guilty. For the first time, I felt finished. Letting someone face the consequences of their choices isn't cruelty. It's balance. Over the following weeks, I dismantled every point of access he had. My insurance, my credit, my email, my accounts. Margaret helped, methodical and calm. Each step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been held hostage. Daniel stayed. He never asked me to forgive my father. He didn't try to fix the family. He just showed up, after appointments, after long nights, after moments when sleep didn't come. He didn't push, didn't judge. His presence became my steady ground. The day of the formal legal action arrived. The district attorney's office confirmed charges: unauthorized access, insurance fraud, and interference with medical treatment. The words felt like shields. They weren't loud, they weren't dramatic, but they were final. When I informed my mother, her voice trembled with a mixture of fear and relief. "I always knew he used control," she admitted softly. I just never thought he'd do it to you." I didn't argue. I simply said, "Mom, it's done, and it has to be done." Messages came from extended family. Concern, confusion, even attempts to mediate. I redirected them to Priya's office, my voice calm, firm, and unflinching. Boundaries were no longer optional, they were essential. When my father's birthday dinner came around, I attended, folder in hand. Documents, neatly organized. Calm in my step. He stood at the head of the table, talking about loyalty, miracles, family pride. I waited for the right moment, then slid the folder across to him. "Dad," I said evenly, "can you explain why the hospital postponed my transplant?" The room went silent. Caleb's face drained of color. My mother's hand gripped the edge of her chair. And then my father exploded, accusing me of disrespect, betrayal, turning private matters into public humiliation. I didn't flinch. I just opened the folder. Timestamps, access logs, emails, screenshots. Everything laid bare, undeniable. He stopped mid-sentence. The weight of proof hit him harder than words ever could. No one defended him. He had built his control on silence and assumption. And now, with everything documented, he had nothing left. I walked away from the table, quietly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't storm out. I simply left, knowing the shift had occurred. After that dinner, my life changed quietly, almost imperceptibly at first. The phone stopped ringing with messages demanding money, favors, or obedience. My inbox wasn't full of guilt-laden pleas from family trying to keep the peace. My apartment smelled of herbs and sunlight, And for the first time, I could sit without thinking someone was watching, judging, or waiting to pull a lever that controlled my life. Daniel stayed. He didn't demand gratitude. He didn't insist on forgiveness. He simply showed up after appointments, after sleepless nights, after moments when my body ached and my mind raced. His presence became my steady rhythm. I returned to work, quietly like I had always done. Electronics, customers, problem solving. I listened, I guided, I remembered names. But now I carried a secret weightlessness. I wasn't just surviving illness. I was free from manipulation. My father's control had been dismantled piece by piece, not with rage, but with calm precision and evidence. Margaret visited often, sitting on my balcony among the small pots of herbs, sipping tea, watching me bloom. "You're different now," she said one morning. "Stronger, careful, calm, and finally untouchable." I smiled. She was right. I had been untouchable not because of force, not because of anger, but because I had taken ownership of my own life. Boundaries, documents, legal protections, they weren't just paper. They were shields, reminders, and declarations that I would not be dominated again. My mother reached out occasionally, cautiously. Our conversations were smaller, but more honest. She admitted quietly that she had always known about my father's manipulations, but had felt powerless to stop them. Now, she simply listened when I spoke, and I spoke only what I wanted to share. We rebuilt not a perfect relationship, but one based on honesty rather than fear. My father, meanwhile, faced consequences that were factual, unyielding, and legally binding. Identity misuse, insurance fraud, interference with medical care. The court didn't lecture him. It didn't dramatize his actions. It simply confirmed the facts. Actions have consequences. He could no longer manipulate the system, or me, under the guise of familial authority. I realized that freedom isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It doesn't come from vengeance. It comes from reclaiming what belongs to you, protecting it carefully, and refusing to let anyone take it without consent. That principle became my anchor. Months later, I watched the small shoots on my balcony push through the soil. Tiny green, leaves reaching toward sunlight. I tended them, watered them, nurtured them, and in a strange, comforting way, they mirrored my own life, finally allowed to grow without interference, without someone taking credit, without manipulation. I reflected on the surgery, the 8 months of waiting, the betrayal, and the calm fight that followed. The kidney had saved me physically, yes, but reclaiming my life, setting boundaries, exposing manipulation, and protecting my autonomy, that was a cure of a different kind. Messages from relatives came occasionally, questions, probing, advice disguised as concern. I forwarded them to Priya without reading, letting the legal shield I had built do its work. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I still work in electronics. I still solve problems. I still help customers the way I like, quietly, efficiently, with empathy. But the difference now is subtle yet profound. Every choice I make belongs to me. Every plan I carry out is mine alone. And every morning, when sunlight spills across my apartment, I breathe without fear, without guilt, and without the weight of someone else's control pressing down on me. Daniel once asked if I ever thought about forgiveness. I told him calmly, forgiveness isn't always necessary. Survival is. And that was true. Letting go of the need to reconcile with someone who tried to endanger your life is not cruelty. It is clarity. It is peace. One night, months after everything settled, my phone rang from an unknown number. I didn't answer. I let it go to voicemail. I looked around at my apartment, at my plans, at the tiny green leaves on the balcony. I had survived betrayal, manipulation, and medical emergencies. I had survived my father's attempts to control my life. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something steady, something permanent, peace. Walking away wasn't revenge. It was survival. Real family is not defined by DNA or shared history. Real family is defined by respect, trust, and care. And now, at last, I got to choose who had a place in my life and who did not.